Hello, everybody. I think we're live. If we are, then welcome to the coffee chat. Welcome to the one for, I guess it's supposed to be for May or for June. We had one on May 2nd. Oh, okay. I realized I just went live. I'm watching the YouTube now. I just went live. So apologies. You caught me mid-sentence. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Monero coffee chat. The one for May or June. We had one on May 2nd, but we're also having one on May 30th. So, it's fine. Justin is not here today to moderate. He is going to wrestle some bears or something like that. That's what he does in his free time. But I'm here because I don't have a life. So it's great that I can be here to moderate for you guys. And this time I am not alone. Usually people get concerned whenever they say Diego's going to moderate a coffee chat because the first 20 minutes always starts off with just me rambling to myself, and then maybe one or two people join out of pity. But that's not the case this time. We have plenty of awesome people that are going to be talking with you guys about a variety of things. I'm just going to start by introducing myself. My name is Diego Salazar. On Monero community, I go by Rarar, and I am a public servant. I work for the core team. I do design things, and I generally try to make sure the Monero community has the resources that they need, and things are all running smoothly on as many fronts as possible. So that's me, and we've got some fantastic people here lined up for you. Let's go ahead and start with Daniel. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Kim. I'm a president and CEO of Sweetwater Digital Asset Consulting, which bridges the worlds of traditional finance and investing with open source nonprofit cryptocurrencies, of which, in my opinion, Monero is the current leader. I've been working on a few things. There's been an uptick of interest that I'm getting inquiries as a result of the Monero Means Money film lecture that has just passed over like 13,000 views so far since being released on the first of the month. And I'm also in the process of updating some of the charts that I presented in that presentation. Maybe we can talk about it a bit later, but we are, as we all know, we're living in extraordinary times with the coronavirus, and data that just came out from the Federal Reserve is additional evidence for the monumental disconnect in terms of supply and demand with fiat versus cryptocurrencies such as Monero.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got our very own Hollywood movie star with us today. He was part of a top movie. It's no big deal, guys. It's no big deal. He puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like the rest of us. Scott, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm a small-time contributor, mainly focusing on done localization stuff since the GUI Beta 2, help out with DEF CON stuff, and am currently in the process of, once I figure out get kind of a demo test working, going to try to do the QML, the mobile UI interface for potentially trying to get Monero onto Linux mobile and looking somewhat nice. So that'll probably take some time, but that's in the works. So.
Awesome. And we've got a core team member here also. Maybe you want to introduce yourself?
That would be me, Arctic Mine. Yes, I'm on the core team, and I'm also to work on the scaling side of the Monero project, fees and transaction scaling. I'm actually in the process of working on some changes to the long and short-term medians and how that would affect scaling to address certain concerns that were raised in an issue, actually. So that's me. That's Arctic Mine or Francisco.
Okay, and we got someone new here, I think. Have you joined the coffee chat before, Seth?
I have not yet, no.
Okay, well, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Seth Simmons. I've been in Monero since I think May 2018 is when I kind of jumped in purely to mine initially, and then kind of fell down the rabbit hole of why privacy is so important in cryptocurrencies. And as far as what I do in Monero, I'm not a dev, so I'm not really working on that side of things. Even though I'd like to do a little bit more of that, but kind of the core of what I've been doing is just really learning, researching, and trying to be a presence on Twitter. There's not a lot of Monero people active on Twitter, and I feel like it's a important user base to capture. So have been trying to kind of stay engaged there, have some good conversations, and interestingly, out of that, got the chance to be on 2 podcasts recently talking about Monero, which was fun. I am definitely not the best voice for Monero, but it was nice to have that opportunity and share some information about that, fight some of the normal kind of myths or half truths about Monero, and just kind of chat about why privacy matters.
All right, thank you very much. So we got our 5 experts here. If you had any questions, by all means, feel free to put them in the chat. And as soon as we're finished discussing whatever thing we are discussing currently, we'll go ahead and get to those. And they could be anything from absolute noob questions, which we may not cover in super detail, because there are great resources available for those, but we can point you to those and discuss them in some detail, or specific things that have kind of been happening about the community. And that's kind of what we're going to jump into next, is just what have we been up to for the past month since the last coffee chat? Where have things come in this past month? It's been quite the exciting month, at least to me, as I see on the research front. Been doing a lot of talking with Sarang. You know, maybe I'm going to shoot him a message and see if he wants to come join us and give us an update on that, because there's been some really exciting things that have been happening on the academic front as well. We got a new CLI release out, and the GUI has not yet been released, right? It's getting close. Hopefully here. So to prepare for our next fork, although there's not going to be any no, it's not even a fork. We decided that there's not going to be any breaking changes, so you would still be able to use the old one and be on the same chain, if I recall correctly, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But that's coming up soon, and that has Dandelion ++, which is kind of super duper cool. So what does it do? It increases the privacy of Monero from a networking perspective. I always say that Monero is kind of super boring, because every major thing that we do, they're like, okay, what does this accomplish? We're like, well, it increases our users' privacy. It increases our users' privacy. That's the thing we say again and again and again. And so to the outside world, it looks like we're super boring. We're not working on smart contracts. We're not working on, you know, like the second layer something or others. We're working on increasing our users' privacy. And yet somehow, this is really, really hard, takes up a lot of resources, and things get quite difficult. So actually, I'm going to pass it off to Daniel Kim. Why do you think, like, what do you think about the difficulty of implementing privacy, not just in digital systems, but in open distributed digital systems? Because, you know, anyone can make privacy for their desktop application or mobile application that only communicates with the host server or something like that. But then when you're talking about a ledger that goes on everybody's computer, and, you know, we have to be able to verify each other's stuff to make sure that we're not doing anything sneaky. I mean, like, how do we go about accomplishing this in a sane way?
Yeah, it's one of the amazing things about this project, I think, is because, well, I touched on this in Monero Means Money, but there's digital privacy and digital scarcity, right? So with Bitcoin, we now have a way to manufacture digital scarcity that doesn't require a central authority to maintain that. The whole concept of fungibility in money is kind of hard to get your head around, because especially in the digital realm, where we're talking about everything being a sequence of ones and zeros. So, you know, there's nothing more easy to tell apart from each other than strings of ones and zeros, right? So it's like comparing numbers. Like it's trivial to say this number is equal to that number. So what's amazing is this ability to synthesize fungibility, a workable fungibility, kind of an engineered fungibility, out of these easily distinguishable sequences of bits. So, and that's something that's, yeah, again, it's been refined even more in the latest V0.16. And my congratulations to the numerous devs who helped make it possible. It's really remarkable that the pace of innovation within Monero has continued undeterred by the global pandemic. And I guess I like to say to like normies who I deal with that there are a lot of introverts working on these projects, and so something like a global virus is not really going to slow down progress as much as one might think, and so that's definitely seen with the number of commits, the number of new lines of code that are in V0.16.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. This is, I think, this whole pandemic situation, which has been going on for a couple months now, and it's worldwide and it's affecting everybody. I think you're right. It's actually just super thrilling, actually, that we're wondering, okay, what's it going to look like for, I'm sure, it's kind of shaking up the crypto space. Like, okay, what does this mean for productivity? And, I think it's interesting that around the world, we're seeing kind of a slight tangent that is on topic, but also off topic. Like we're seeing not just business, like not just Monero, but other businesses, like regular businesses that are moving towards remote stuff, as they're seeing that they're not having a drop in productivity either. So that's kind of an interesting, unprecedented thing that maybe some people predicted and some people didn't. But I would say it's not surprising, because we have had communities around for a long time, like Monero, that have just been able to push out consistently good research and code and getting these things to the people in a way that in some senses surpasses other FOSS projects, because other FOSS projects either have like this benevolent dictator for life type thing, or they have just one or two people working on stuff. And Monero is quite varied and diverse, and yet we still have a really solid core and a lot of volunteers coming in to do these things in a way that it always somehow comes to work in the end. Some things can be a little bit hairy on the in between, but it comes in and works out in the end. So Seth, what's your take on that? What's your take on this whole ability for the community? You yourself, you say you're not a dev, but at the same time, like you can find other things to do that's not development.
Yeah.
And that we also got a question in the chat about that. Seth, please talk more about what non-devs can do to help. So do you think maybe that you can go ahead and touch on that?
Yeah. I think first off, I just want to say it's awesome to see how Monero can keep iterating without a dev fund, without a corporation behind it, without all of these things that I feel like a lot of other people in the space claim that has to happen for a project like this to succeed. And I think it's pretty crazy that it's happened so far, all on community donations and all with a lot of anonymous contributors and just people willing to pitch in and make the tools that we need to maintain financial sovereignty and financial privacy. So that's pretty awesome. But as for someone who's not a dev, I think the key things for me, one is just staying up to date, learning, trying to figure out what's going on in the space, what privacy improvements are happening, both in Monero and outside of it, so that we can have better nuanced discussions among ourselves in the community. I think it's really helpful, and it's one of the things that makes Monero stand out, is that we can have really difficult discussions about privacy features, about consensus level changes, about how we actually do consensus, these kinds of things. We have tough, two-sided, difficult debates about these and talk about them, and we work through them, and we ultimately move forward and keep iterating. So I think part of that is just staying informed, trying to keep up to date so that you can be a good contributing part of that conversation. Another one, and one that I want to start jumping into more, is just helping out with documentation, like Moneropedia and all of the guides that we have on getmonero.org, and those kinds of things are things that people who aren't devs can help contribute to. And from what I've seen, it's a little difficult right now. It requires a lot of steps, but hopefully we can kind of make that a little simpler and make it easier for people to contribute in kind of a wiki type way, just to make it simpler for people to help keep those things up to date. So it's not just the people writing the code that are also doing the documentation, but a lot more people can pitch in there. So I think that's a key way as well. And I think the last way to be helpful if you're not a dev is just keep donating to those people who are doing the hard, difficult day in, day out dev work. Those people who have proven their worth to the community and need that funding, like the Monero Research Lab, like Monero Mu, and like all of the others who are working on localization efforts and GUI, and there's just so much that goes on here, and there is a lot of funding needed. So just keep donating to those people who you see have shown their worth and who are proposing to keep contributing good features. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And speaking of donations, if you go to ccs.getmonero.org, which I will go ahead and put inside of this chat, ccs.getmonero.org, you will see that we have a one open, the other three in funding required. If you go to funding required, you see the ones that need to be raised. The other two need to be moved because they have been completed. Yay! But we have one which is from Mitchell, PhD. I forget his last name. He has like 2 last names. And he's doing research on post-quantum strategies for Monero. You can go ahead and click on that and read through his proposal. Some pretty exciting stuff that he wants to be working on to help make Monero quantum proof for the future. So that's something that we often get in like our Skepticism Sundays, or people asking like, well, what does Monero plan to do when quantum computers come around? We've got this coming up, this research coming to help us answer some of those questions. But we need to finish off the funding. We're at 509 Monero out of 576. So anybody watching, please throw a few Monero to this guy if this kind of thing is interesting to you or you want to support that. By all means, please go to this proposal. Now I'm just going to post this in there also. There you go. That's the proposal itself. So does anybody like, I want to talk about this a little bit. Can we take a brief mini tangent to kind of this whole quantum computer idea, what it means for cryptocurrencies in general, what it means for Monero, what Mitchell is going to be, I should message Mitchell and see if he wants to come on and talk about it. But in the meantime, does anybody have any thoughts about kind of the threat that it has for Monero in the future?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. I think it belongs in the academic research realm, which is what Mitchell is doing. It is something that is not an immediate threat, but it's something that we need to be looking at in the long term. So that's kind of where I see it. It belongs at the basic academic research level, which is essentially what the proposal is doing. So that's kind of my take on the whole thing.
Okay. Arctic Mine, while I have you on here, I want to ask you specifically a couple of questions, and it also kind of has to deal with some of the ongoing research that's happening. So we have CLSAG. For those of you who don't know, we're moving to a slightly different ring signature proving scheme from MLSAG to CLSAG, and it's going to, we're waiting on a proposal for an audit for both the math and the code. And then once that's audited, we can go ahead and implement that, which is going to further reduce transaction sizes and verification times by some percentage. That does not come to the top of my head at the moment. And since you're our resident scaling guy in terms of fees and scaling, and then especially thinking that we have things like Triptych and Arcturus on the horizon, which may take us over to like over 100 ring sizes that are over 100 because they reduce things so much. What are these even further transaction size reductions going to be doing with fees? Are we going to have to kind of mess with the fee structure again, similar to what we did when we got bulletproofs in there? Or are we going to try to keep transaction sizes relatively the same, but pad the rest with bigger rings? Like what is your take on all that?
My take right now is that with CLSAG, what's going to happen is a slight reduction in transaction sizes. And that is going to mean a further reduction in fees, although not necessarily the minimum fee. Part of what I'm working on right now is the fact that there are some issues that were raised with respect to fee variability. This was raised actually just before the start of the whole COVID-19 crisis. And to make a long story short, I do think there are some changes that are going to be needed to both the long-term medium, how it handles, and the minimum fee, how it is determined, and also possibility of introducing a variable penalty-free zone. So there's overall work in that area that would be implemented at the same time as CLSAC. I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking at. The consensus that I read from my conversations on the MRL is that there isn't really a strong support for increasing the ring size at this point. So what we would see with respect of CLSAG is roughly, I would say, somewhere in the 20%, maybe 25% reduction in transaction sizes, with a commensurate reduction in fees. That being said, that is not necessarily, it may even see an increase in the minimum fee because of how it would be calculated. But definitely on what we'll consider the normal fee, it would have to go down. It would go down as a result of that, just because the sizes are smaller. Now, on the longer term, it's more interesting. Both the transaction sizes that are proposed, for example, Actueros, is fairly comparable to what we have right now if we were to go, say, to 100 rings or in that kind of range. So my read there is it's not going to be a significant change in transaction sizes. Rather, what we're going to see is a significant increase in the mixing from ring signatures, essentially. So again, it depends on what we see. The other possibility, and that it is, we're still looking down the road, is that we may have to increase the base. If there's a slight increase in transaction size, we may have to increase the base penalty-free zone from the 300,000 bytes. I mean, there's a possibility of that could also be considered. But I would suspect that the longer-term solution, we're going to see essentially similar size transactions with a significantly higher mix set. So that would be sort of answer your question.
Yeah. It's some really exciting stuff. For those of you who don't know, our very own Sarang Noether, who works in MRL, he has both himself and in collaboration with others been making complete alternatives to our ring signature proving scheme that is not a drop-in replacement of a portion of it like CLSAG is to MLSAG, but kind of just like a complete restructuring of how the whole thing works. And in so doing, they're much more efficient, easy, much faster to verify, much smaller, which results in the ability, like it would shrink transaction sizes so much that we would be able to, if we wanted to stay at an equivalent transaction size, we would be able to have rings upwards of, they were saying like 90, 100, or maybe slightly possibly more. Considering the fact that we currently have a ring size of like 11, like that's quite the jump in how many other outputs you are mixing with. And this is really exciting for us because of our three-pronged scheme of stealth addresses, ring CT, and ring signatures. Ring signatures are definitely the weakest point of our privacy currently. And so being able to like really boost that up, and so like sorry, taking a step back, it's our weakest point, and it shows not just we know that, but kind of like all the other privacy people in the space kind of know that, and they poke at that. And it's something that we own. It's something we definitely are not like. We feel that the privacy that we give currently is quite robust, but every strong system has a weak point, and that doesn't mean that weak point is like a complete failure. It just means it's weaker than the other points, which are much stronger. And so being able to bolster that up even further is just going to be fantastic. And in my opinion, that's when Monero has arrived. Like when all fronts are now as strong as we can possibly make them with current technology, bleeding edge technology sometimes, and it's all completely trustless. Like that's a pretty massive thing for the world, to have access to. So that's super exciting to me. But Triptych and Arcturus are still quite a ways away. They're still quite young. They need some more time out there in the wild. Sarang has submitted this to it was some sort of conference or something, his paper, to be looked over by some other people and get feedback on it. And there have been improvements almost on a weekly basis as to how they're able to optimize these things and make them better. So it's really exciting. We just got some numbers in the past couple MRL meetings about exactly how much smaller and how much more faster for verification these are, and the numbers look really promising. They look really exciting. So you should be excited because we got some fantastic stuff. And when Sarang's proposal is done and ready for another renewal for another 3 months. Please, please, let's all donate money to that. Keep him employed for another 3 months to work for us, because like the best stuff is just on the horizon, guys, and we don't want to miss out on this. So, Daniel, we're going to kind of jump topics a little bit here. You said that there were a few questions that you have received regarding your presentation that maybe you wanted to take a little bit of time to get into and expand on a little bit more. We can go ahead and take some time to do that now if you'd like.
All right, sure. First, before I forget, though, let me do a couple follow-on points. So for on the topic of donations to the project, my firm, Sweetwater Digital Asset Consulting, through a donation to OSTIF, the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund, has contributed towards the code audits of CLSAGs. So for those community members who are US citizens and want to have a tax-deductible means of contributing to the project, since unfortunately one drawback to the CCS is that there's no corresponding tax deduction for charitable contributions made to that. So, but if you go through OSTIF to help support the funding of code audits, OSTIF is a 403 charity. So, I'm sorry, 501c3. So yeah, that's an alternate way that might be of interest to some people. Another is, let's see, Seth mentioned, localization work groups. So for the movie Monero Means Money, which I had mentioned is getting some, pretty significant attention, at least on a Monero scale, at least for an 80-minute lecture. 13,000 views is, not too bad for the first month anyway. The translations are something that I think are going to be helpful to help introduce this narrative that squeaky clean people need fungibility. That's something that's not immediately obvious, I think, to people, and it needs to be advocated in people's own language. Since the movie came out, there have been 2 translations that have been provided by volunteers. There's the Chinese Monero community came out with their own translation, and they put it up on. It's not available on YouTube because they have their own preferred video streaming websites, but it's been done. And there's also a Brazilian Portuguese translation subtitles that have also been done by Metric 182. It's been very early to get on these translations for the Portuguese Brazilian community, so they're fortunate to have him. So there will be pending a call for volunteers to help translate Monero Means Money into other languages. So yeah, maybe keep an eye out for that. And then what I mentioned, yeah, to answer your question, Diego, so what I've been seeing lately, one of the charts that I have in Monero Means Money is a chart of inflation of different assets, including the US dollar, gold, Bitcoin, Monero. And when I gave that presentation at C3 in Germany, that was the end of December of last year, which means that the Federal Reserve data for the US dollar was through the end of October, because there's a 2-month lag in the data that comes from the Fed. So basically just now, we're seeing kind of the beginnings of what has been the fiat monetary response to the pandemic, because just a couple of days ago, the St. Louis Fed, through its Fred website, put out the updated number for the USD money supply through April 1st. And so in the month of March, the US dollar supply of M1, which is it's paper money, it's currency, it's cash and coins, it's checking accounts and savings accounts. So it's money and things that act like money. That went up in March of 2020. It went up by $550 billion in 1 month. So that $550 billion represents 13% of the total. So in 1 month, the US dollar money supply inflated by 13%. Another way to look at that $550 billion figure, since again, it's hard for people to get their heads around these very large numbers, basically the supply of US dollars inflated by 1 Monero market cap every 97 minutes in the month of March. So it really shows the gigantic differences in scale that we're talking about here. So while the Fed was doing this, the inflation rate of Monero has continued to decrease. It's now down at the basically 2% level on an annualized basis, and it continues to go asymptotically to 0% as time goes on. And the situation in fiat, in which we have this explosion in the supply of the money supply, combined with a contraction in actual economic output. I mean, I guess companies can claim that they're just as productive now as they were before, but I don't know. It's hard to know how much of that is posturing, how much of that is is actual. But it just seems, given that for example, that the unemployment rate in the U.S. is now around the 20% mark, it just seems very unlikely that the U.S. GDP is going to not take a huge hit along with that loss of labor productivity. So basically in fiat, we have the situation where the supply of money is exploding while the actual economic output is imploding. And we have the exact opposite situation in the Monero community, with the monetary supply continuing to inflate very modestly in order to incentivize the global network of miners that is helping to do the accounting work for the network. And yet, with that squeeze in the growth of the money supply, comes a burst of productivity with, for example, V0.16 that just came out, and these ongoing research initiatives like the CLSAG and the kind of exciting pipeline of innovations that starts at Monero Research Lab. So yeah, thinking about these issues on this comparative basis, it's never been more clear now than in the past.
Yeah, I think. Oh, Scott, you want to say something?
No, I'll let Dr. Daniel Kim continue. So I was just looking at stuff on Monero for questions, but haven't been answered yet.
No worries, I was done.
Okay.
I just think it's quite fascinating, like you said, that as Monero, and this is to some degree true of lots of cryptocurrencies, but as the supply continues to get to inflate in Monero's case, at a very modest degree, because we are going lower and lower and lower. Monero, for those of you who don't know, doesn't have a halvening schedule like Bitcoin and its derivatives. We have kind of a smoothly decreasing one. So every block reward is a teeny tiny bit less than the last one. And for the next quite some while, somebody can give me an exact number, like Monero is actually putting out less coins than Bitcoin, even though Bitcoin just had its first halvening. Not its first one, it's like third one, but it just happened a little while ago. So and you hear again and again that Bitcoin's supply is finite. Bitcoin is not inflating, which is true for the long term. But what most people don't realize is for our entire lifetime, like, it is still inflating. The supply is still inflating. Like, there is a maximum that it will go to, but the supply is still increasing as block rewards are coming out and miners are being subsidized for their work. We have no idea whether it's going to work after all of the coins have been mined in terms of a fee market, or heck, even those last couple of tranches where there's like one Bitcoin coming out, or parts of a Bitcoin coming out per block reward. Is this going to be enough to incentivize miners to keep mining? This is something that is just uncharted territory, and people are making theories. I don't know. It doesn't seem like these things seem to go against each other for me, and anyone could comment on this if they would like to as well. Where users want fees to be as low as possible, so they're not paying $200 per transaction, but miners want fees to be as high as possible because they want a reason to mine. If they're only getting pennies for their work, then they're not going to do it anymore. And once the fee market takes over and there is no more block reward, there's no more subsidy for them to do it. How many people are going to leave the space? We even saw that in this Bitcoin halvening that just happened. the amount of miners that were securing the network dropped. And how much more is that going to happen as these things continue, which is why Monero chose to have a tail emission, to have this thing to continually subsidize miners after the last Monero is minted for an indefinite period of time. So yeah, if anyone else wants to chime in on their thoughts on that, on by all means, go for it.
Yeah, I would comment on that. My instinct is that the so-called fee market will not work, and in fact, it will fail. The main reason I feel this way, now I can't prove this, and this is one of the interesting things about it, is that the entire scaling and fee structure of Monero predicts that the total fees per block are proportionate to the block reward. So as the block reward goes down, so do the total fees per block. If you then look at a scaling mechanism for, say, a coin such as, and a good example of the Bitcoin Satoshi Vision with very large blocks, which has a weaker penalty, effective penalty, than Monero, then the expectation would be the fees would go to zero. And you would have essentially a tragedy of the commons. Some of the other arguments that I've seen is, of course, that you could see a cartel of miners attempting to set fees and then some sort of breakdown of the cartel. I mean, we saw a similar phenomenon with prices of oil and OPEC, for example, fairly recently. Cartels tend to collapse in many respects. So I'm a real pessimist on this. I can't mathematically go and say it's going to fail. Now, that being said, it's also seen a fair amount of research. One of them actually came out of the International Monetary Fund, of all places, where they make some very strong arguments as to why you would have major instabilities associated with a fee-only market. There was also a couple of papers. One of them, I think, was from developers in Ethereum that reached similar conclusions. And so the evidence out there is actually fairly negative towards the fee market in Bitcoin. There's also a very significant amount of denial about this in the community, basically with a notable exception of Monero. Pretty well every other proof of work coin, or the other one being Dogecoin, have these falling block rewards. So this is not just a Bitcoin problem. This is across the spectrum of proof of work cryptocurrencies. Is that this is not a stable solution, and in fact, I think the evidence is that it would not work. I hate to be a pessimist. I can't prove this. But what I have seen just from researching Monero's, in fact, how the fee structure of Monero works, is that's the conclusion I have to reach.
Yeah, a couple quick points I'd add to that. Part of what you're talking about, the research around it, I think there's been some really interesting stuff lately. One paper that I was reading talks about how the reliance on a fee market actually opens up Bitcoin mining to a whole new set of attacks, in that you can actually you can withdraw hash rate until fees reach a certain amount, because you don't actually want to mine until you're going to get a certain amount of money per block. And so you'll actually have issues where the hash rate will go like this constantly as people wait for fees to build up. When fees build up, they go turn on their miners, they mine a block, and then they wait for them to drop down, and then they wait for them to build up. And that was just one of, I think it was 4 different attacks that they talked about, but where when you don't have any block subsidy, or you have a block subsidy that's minimal, you run into issues where you have to have new mining attacks that become possible and become actually preferable to just mining altruistically once you reach a very low block subsidy. So that's definitely interesting and something else to keep an eye on. But like you said, Arctic Mine, that's not something we can prove right now. We can only theorize about how the actual fee market would develop and that kind of thing. And the other piece I think that doesn't get talked about a lot is the way that Monero is planning for this. I think really takes a two-headed approach to what Monero will be in the future, in that we're not only saying it's going to be a store of value, and we're not only saying it's going to be digital cash, but we're kind of hedging both bets and saying it can be both. We're going to have really low inflation, like you said, asymptotically approaching zero. So it will be a good store of value, and not to mention, we know exactly what the inflation rate will be at any given point in time. We can know exactly what to expect. So there's not going to be, like you were talking about, Daniel, how there's this 13% inflation over the last month. That's never going to happen in Monero, where we just wake up one day and there's 13% more Monero because issuance changed randomly. So we know that, so it makes a good store of value. And then for something that we actually will use to spend on things, the private digital cash, it fits well for that because we're not relying only on TX fees. We can actually subsidize miners with the infinite block subsidy and make sure that we can keep fees to a reasonable level. I mean, I would definitely expect that compared to the dollar, they'll rise over time. But I don't think that we're going to run into the issues that Bitcoin is already running into, where it just becomes prohibitive to transact on chain, especially during high usage times, like we saw from the date of the halvening for, I think, until yesterday, the day before the mempool finally cleared. But getting $5, $10, $15 transactions is already a problem, and Bitcoin really doesn't have that much adoption. If we're being honest, it's mostly speculation still at this point. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for more and more research to come out on that.
And I just think it's so fascinating how the Bitcoin community has to kind of pick a side. Like, are you for Bitcoin being digital cash, or are you for Bitcoin being a store of value? And there have been forks as a result of this, leading to kind of the Bitcoin Cash style of things. And you have to pick a side. And if you pick the side that's not my side, then we hate you, kind of thing. And so, like you said, Monero's kind of choosing this. I wouldn't even call it a middle ground, because we're not really making compromises on either side so much as saying we're trying to achieve both. We're trying to have our cake and eat it too. And is that like a super, super gutsy thing to do? Yeah, it is. But like, Monero's up for a challenge. Like, the people of Monero have never backed down from really hard things, from really like privacy on a distributed ledger is really tough, but we're not backing down from that. So like, Monero took all of these flaws that Bitcoin has, and all of them seem, from the ground, if you actually know how these things work, they can seem pretty insurmountable. But Monero's like, we're going to give it a shot. We're going to try to make it happen. And for the most part, at this point, we don't know, because as everyone keeps alluding to, all we can do is speculate on a lot of things at the moment. We honestly don't know the tools that exist, or the refinement of the tools that exist to start picking away at Monero and the blockchain and stuff. Because if these people did have these tools, why would they reveal them to us? We can speculate, we can do math, right? We can chart things out, we can make our models and say this is what would be needed to break our privacy assumptions, but we don't know at the moment what things exist, in the same way that we don't know everything about the economy in terms of Monero's price. We don't know everything about the internal economy, like how our little gambit on the tail emission is going to work out. There's a lot of things that we don't know, but Monero does things right. So other cryptocurrencies also have things that they don't know, but they just say, we trust that this is going to work. But for the most part, Monero puts out research and more research and more research. So we have math, at least, whereas other cryptocurrencies have nothing. We have math, at least, to try to back up our ideas and the assumptions that we're making. And you should see, like, Monero is so critical of itself. Many coins, we are critical of other coins for not being fungible and stuff, but we are also extremely self-aware in terms of, well, we don't really have hard numbers to back up this assumption. And it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. They're like, so when can we get those numbers? When can we get the math on these assumptions that we're making? It's just intrinsic to the nature and the thinking of Monero, that we just want to be as sure as we possibly can, using robust math to know that we're going the correct direction, instead of just kind of throwing things out there. That's what's really cool to me about the community. There's the spirit there. And Scott, I want you to take a little bit of time, if you could. Can you talk about that? Like, you've been, you say you've been kind of a low-key contributor for quite some time. But you do hang around the community, and you do see this kinds of thing. Would you say that this to be true? And would you be able to expand on these points about the spirit of Monero, in terms of, like, we want things to be evidence-based?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually, how to put it, I wouldn't consider myself super active on a lot of social media sites. I know there are people who are perhaps far more, I would say, defensive of Monero. I know on Reddit, for at least a period of time, Flinched was particularly kind of, he put a lot of energy into defending people who would put out false narratives, I guess, false facts, if you will. Fake news is kind of a loaded term, but people who would, cite research papers that had, the problem addressed, like, the example, I think one of the examples being, mandatory ring sizes of, 3 or more or whatever, rather than, there was, prior to 2017, you could have like a ring size of 1 effectively. And so having these research papers put out by the Monero Research Lab and put out by other academics in the field is particularly helpful because people actually within our community read them and will cite them, either in talks with like, local meetups, back when physical meetups were still a thing, or, that kind of thing. Because at the end of the day, how was it? Like, trying to think of a way to describe it, but we are, I think, perhaps more than pretty much any other community, like a data-driven community, and that's and part of what makes the Monero community so strong, I think, is because people flock to that. You can look at, for example, perhaps the pandemic going on right now, right? So, like, people look to the medical professionals in the field and all of the academic work behind, infections and so forth, rather than, say, politicians who, kind of play loose with the facts, as it were. And so people are more keen to trust people who have a fact-driven mindset, I guess.
Yep. Thanks, Scott. Is there, let me take a quick look and see if there's any questions in chat. Is there anything that I have missed? Is there anything that...
Yeah, there's one question concerning Tails towards the beginning that wasn't...
Can we talk about getting the GUI wallet included in Tails? Scott, I know you were looking at some, like the Debian thing. You were talking about it for some time. That was kind of back in the day, though. And now we have the Hunix guy who is packaging the Monero GUI for Hunix and other Debian-based systems, and that I think is already up and going. But do you know the status of the Tails kind of deal?
Yeah. So, well, not Tails specifically, because I'm not like a heavy active user of Tails. My uses of Tails basically boils down to I have it on a flash drive that I carry around on my keychain just for one of those prepper just in cases kind of things. But I will say, because I was looking at where the status was with Hunix, because that was the main focus of, for those who aren't familiar, the person who was creating is now maintaining the Debian package. The primary purpose was to make it included by default in the Hunix package. So as of yesterday, in the point release that came out yesterday, that is now the case. So if you're a user of Hunix and you haven't updated yet, or you're interested in Hunix, if you were to download the most recent release, which is 15.0.1.3.4, you go to release notes, you'll see that the Monero GUI is now by default included in the Hunix workstation. So I didn't go back through the entirety of the CCS proposal, but I think at this point it's largely more of a maintenance sustaining kind of aspect of Hunix, bar any bugs that potentially come up with, mispackaging something. But so I think now that it's installed by default in Hunix, there's potentially, energies that people might spend there can potentially now focus on Tails, in terms of people can go, hey, this other privacy-centric operating system includes Monero by default. Why doesn't Tails, kind of deal? So it gives ammo for privacy kind of focused users, I think, to kind of start asking Tails maintainers, hey, there's this, package maintained by the Hunix folk. And obviously, Unix has a pretty good reputation, and so it's not like, some slapdash package or, something that they're no longer going to maintain. They have a monetary incentive for the next 2 years at least to continue to maintain that package. So it's really, I think, at this point, now that there's a Debian package, it's really going to the Tails folk and repeatedly asking them to include Monero. But as far as any like official commentary from Tails including Monero, I don't think there is yet. But again, it's filing an issue within the Tails repository or whatever the forums, making it more visible.
So the groundwork has been laid, basically. A lot of the groundwork has been laid. So really it's just a matter of people going to Tails and like, hey, poke. This is something we want. Monero is private. Tails is all about privacy. So we think this would go great together. So if this is something that does interest you, then by all means, go to the Tails community, find out the proper, respectful way to get out there and ask these questions about when this kind of thing can be added. The more they get asked and the more people ask, the more likely they are to take a look and consider it. That's just the way it is with almost everything. Okay, guys, we are coming up on the hour. We got about like 8 minutes to go. I mean, obviously, if we get more and more questions, we can stay a little bit longer, but don't want to waste anybody's time. People are busy. Daniel's a Hollywood star now, so he's got a lot of things going on his plate. So just wanted to ask the chat and also the people that are on with me here today, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on? Anything that was particularly pertinent this past month that you felt was worth discussing or letting the community know was going on?
I think just a couple things that I'd mentioned. I think there's been a lot of really cool research coming out over the last month, and a lot of specifically just kind of good news for Monero and confirmations of how well the privacy works. There's been multiple chain analysis type firms, including Chainalysis, who've come out and said that Monero is one that they can't track. They don't have plans for it right now. Some of them have said they have plans, but haven't come up with anything. So it's just kind of a good confirmation that even coins like Zcash are being added to their services, and yet Monero remains one of the few where you just use it and by default you get probably the best privacy, definitely the best privacy guarantees by default, but some of the best privacy guarantees overall in this space. So it's been great to see that confirmation just kind of coming out, and then also just great info, like Kraken just released a research report on Monero that was actually really well done. It was a lot better than I expected. There were a couple small points that weren't perfect, but I definitely don't expect that. So it's cool to see very high level articles being put out by an exchange that supports Monero, and one of the US exchanges that supports it, because that's something I run into all the time, is they're just going to ban Monero. Everyone's going to ban Monero, and you can't even buy it in the US. And yet Kraken is a great example of where you can buy it and where you can use it properly, and they're even pretty keen on it. So it's cool to see that. Yeah, lots of good research, lots of good publicity, and also Monero Means Money has been awesome. Really, for the first time, I've had several people reach out to me on Twitter via DM and say, hey, I watch Monero Means Money and I have all these questions. I want to learn more about Monero. Where are some more resources? And it's also been one of my go-to resources for when someone says, what is Monero or why does it matter? I can shoot them the link to that. And I think it's a good kind of intro, especially if they have a basic understanding of Bitcoin or other coins like that. I think it's a great kind of jump in there. So it's been super helpful as a resource, and it's, I think, turned a lot of people onto Monero that weren't in the past at all and had no interest in it before that. So great there, and thanks for all your work on that, Daniel. It's been awesome.
I do have a comment that I think I would like to make, and that is that we should be prepared we could be prepared. There's a significant probability. There's a probability that this could occur of a sudden surge in demand on the use of Monero. And I'm talking about a sudden demand on transaction flow and just demand on usage on the blockchain itself. And this could be triggered by a host of different things. I mean, Daniel hinted at what's going on with the US money supply, and I'm not even talking short of some destabilization of the banking system here. The couple of other things with COVID-19 that are significant is the fact that there's a very significant increase in the unemployment rate, and that could drive people away from digital payments such as credit cards and debit cards because they essentially lose their credit ratings. There is also the possible argument that cryptocurrency payments are touchless, and that could put pressure on people wanting to use cryptocurrency payments, I say, for example, compared to chip and PIN, which is very touch intensive. So what I'd simply like to say is there is a chance that we could see a sudden increase in demand on the network, and we think something to keep in mind that we make sure that we can meet that demand and that we can support that demand. I know this sounds like a very positive comment in the sense that Monero is going to do very well, but it also means that we have to roll up our sleeves to make sure that if there's a sudden influx in interest and these people are taken care of and everything works smoothly and that sort of thing. It could be as simple as, say, upgrading your node, making sure your internet connection can handle the load, these kind of things, when we look at that. So that's just a note that I'd like to say from what I've been watching. We should be prepared for that increase in demand and be able to meet it.
Yeah, and I want to actually piggyback off of that and circle back to kind of the beginning of this conversation where we're like, well, what can regular people do to help with stuff like this? And actually, if there is an unexpected surge in demand for Monero, you're going to have a lot of people who don't understand kind of cryptocurrency in general and don't understand Monero, so they may need help. So one of the things that we need to do, not just is make sure our code and our software is running smoothly, but that we have adequate resources in as many places as possible. So if somebody's looking for help and they don't know where to go, there's written pieces, there's written works, there's YouTube videos, there's videos elsewhere, there's books, like we have the Mastering Monero, but it's kind of out of date. So the guys there are working on getting that updated for a version 2. So hopefully that'll happen sometime soon. But so that we have up to date, good resources for people to understand what they're going to start using, because otherwise they're going to lose their money, they're going to lose their seeds, they're never going to come back. All these things are going to happen. It's going to be tragic because they unwittingly are getting their hands on one of the most powerful world-changing technologies of our time, and they will be scared away because it's not because they don't understand some things and they will make some mistakes. So as a regular person that's not a developer, you can go looking through the resources that we have. You can go looking through the things that exist on all the different platforms and say, okay, we have a bit of a weak spot here where this is not adequately explained on this platform, or we don't have this explained at all over here. So we need somebody or something to come along and make some. So if we kind of like make a list, if we get a work group together that's like, okay, like the resource accessibility work group or whatever, right? And their job is to find out where the weak points of our resources are, our documentation, and make sure those are robust and strong. Even something as simple as, to use Monero, it's recommended you have an internet connection of this much down and this much up, right? Like, that's what regular people think in. They're like, well, am I going to be able to run Monero? Am I going to be able to do it from a computer specs perspective, from an internet perspective? They don't know a lot about this other stuff. They just want to know, can I use this? Is this possible for me to use? And sometimes you're going to have to do some digging. Like, does Monero work on older phones or on older versions of Android? Does Cake Wallet work on older versions of Android or iOS? And if you don't know where to find these resources, you're going to be digging through old forum posts and Reddit posts and trying to find these things that should somewhat be accessible but are really not. So that is definitely something that can be done by regular everyday people. Find where the resources are weak or non-existent, and even if you can't write them yourself, first of all, you can learn about those things and then be able to write them yourself. But even if you can't, you can bring that to the attention of the community.
And I would just like to add one kind of small brief addendum really quickly before the chat ends. Probably one of the greatest who's of like where you can contribute within the community, in my opinion. Granted, the links are a little bit out of date, so I'll follow up with Justin to get that updated. But if you go to reddit.com/r/Monero community, like the second pinned post is basically a who's who of all the work groups. So if you're a miner, if you want to work out with the outreach group, you want to work with the localization group, et cetera, all of those work groups are listed there, and that's a great place to read a brief blurb or whatever and see perhaps what best relates to your interests. That's my bit.
All right, thank you. And so we are currently over time. So if there is any last minute comments or questions from anybody, please get those in. But if not, I do want to thank Scott and Seth and Arctic Mine and Daniel Kim for joining with me today. So that way I didn't have to do this myself. I think a lot of great discussion happened. We were able to touch on a lot of different topics. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, viewers out there, for caring enough about Monero and what's going on to get some of your Saturday morning or evening or wherever you are and just watch some people talk about Monero related things. You guys are awesome. The community makes Monero what it is, as we've touched on in this chat. And you guys are a part of that. So thank you for everything that you do. Please go donate to that post-quantum thing. I just want to highlight that one last time. Go to the CCS. If you've got some spare Monero, toss it the way of that CCS proposal, and be on the lookout because Sarang's Q3 proposal is also currently in the ideas section. So if you wanted to go to the GitLab and leave a comment on that, you can. We expect that to be merged soon. So as well, we're going to be having a push to fund that because we want Sarang around with us to do more and more research and get us to those awesome things that are on the horizon. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to go ahead and cut the coffee chat here. Feel free to contact, I think, most any of us on any of the other places that we are at. I know I myself, I got a Telegram wire. I can put you in touch with some of the others. Yeah. Thank you, guys, and we'll call it here. Bye.